virtually meet you.
I thought it was cool that you have, like state and federal background, and I'm coming from the city side, so I thought that'd be a cool balance to talk about.
Yeah, for sure.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us. We're just going to give it a minute or two to let everyone filter in off their lunch hour or last meeting and get the day started. We're excited to join you. If you are wanting to, I'm going to ask that if you put in the chat where you're joining us from, that would be amazing. I love to hear where across the world our alumni and community are joining us. It is a very rainy, gray day here in the Chicago, and I think in most of the Midwest. So I apologize if you're also experiencing this weather, but we're hopefully going to brighten the mood a little bit and bring some fun times and exciting conversation. From DC. I have heard that it is as equally gross weather in DC today. So thanks for taking the time with us. All right, awesome. We're going to get started. And I'm going to start with a little bit of housekeeping. So welcome to everyone who is joining us today. My name is Natalie Orsley, and I'm the Associate Director of Alumni Communities and Volunteer Engagement here at UChicago Alumni. It is a great privilege to be with you today at the start of our Networking in the New Year series in January. Our goal this month is to do a couple things, which is to bring some networking and community building in the new year. We know a lot of people start their year in career conversations off with wanting to maybe make a change or learn a little bit more. So we are excited to be a part of that and hopefully get you to meet some people in your industry or in an industry that you're interested in, and get the ball rolling on maybe some career changes and exciting ventures. We are also growing our community here in terms of industry programming at UChicago. You may know historically our regional communities based on where you live, and our affinity communities based on different identities you hold. We are looking to grow communities that are based in what work you do and what industries you work in. So I'm going to throw my email address in the chat. If you are interested in talking more about that, you have ideas, you have questions, I'd love to hear from you and talk a little bit more. So please feel free to reach out. And before we get started, I just want to say we're going to save some time at the end for questions for our great panelists today. So if you have questions, things you want to ask, things you want to clarify, please throw them in the chat or in the Q&A section, and we will get to them towards the end. But I want to start off by first welcoming our two panelists, Kate and Dora. It's so great to have you today. We're going to be talking about their amazing and very interesting careers in public service. And rather than having me introduce them, I'm going to kick it over to them to talk about themselves, which is everyone's secret favorite thing to do. So Kate, I'm going to start talking with you. Would you like to give us a brief intro into who you are, your career, and what you do?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm so happy to be here today and nice to see everyone. Glad you're joining us from around the country. So my name is Kate Perushek. I am a 2007 graduate of the University of Chicago. I went to the Humphrey School and the School of Social Service Administration. So I did a dual master's in public policy and social work, which was intentional at the time. I thought I might want to run a nonprofit. I come from a lot of work in after school programs for youth. I had worked at a middle school as a translator interpreter for Spanish, and was a UW-Madison grad in Spanish and English. So my path, I know we'll get into details. My path was twisty turny and took me a lot of places, but now I am the deputy commissioner at the Minnesota Department of Labor and Industry, and I oversee our government affairs, our construction codes and licensing division, our 3 employment-based training programs, including registered apprenticeship, and our Office of Combative Sports, which I can tell you more about later too, because that's a fun fact. Never thought my career path would take me to regulating mixed martial arts and professional boxing. And as of January 1, we are now going to regulate kickboxing. So that's my fun fact. And I'm happy to be here.
Amazing. I'm excited to hear all about that. Dora, would you please give us a brief intro into what you do and who you are?
Yeah, hard to follow up, Kate. So hi folks, good afternoon. I think everyone in the chat is in the afternoon time zone. And my name is Dora Gonzalez. I am currently a senior associate on the public engagement team, specifically focused on community engagement and government affairs with the Obama Foundation here in Chicago. I have had kind of a thread of public service on the city side and some nonprofits throughout my career. And, excited to share why that is. I have a very personal story of what brought me there and a lot of mentors that guided me. Previous to that, I'm a Californian, if anyone's from there. I did my undergrad at the University of California, Berkeley, and then worked in the Bay Area in the mayor's office and a couple elected officials there. So pleasure to meet you. And my fun fact is that I used to perform improv comedy professionally in San Francisco. And it is the best professional development thing I've ever done in my career that has helped every job I've had. And so happy to talk about that at any time.
That sounds amazing. I have heard that before, that improv is really great for if you're someone who has to walk into a meeting and kind of hold your own and everything, is being able to do that. That's amazing. Well, I think the first thing to start talking about when we talk about careers is talking about career paths and how you got to where you are. You both alluded to kind of having very interesting and different career paths. Kate, I'd love to start with you. And could you talk a little bit about how you got to where you are and what made you decide to pursue a career in public service? I think it's not always the most obvious route to people, and especially not something that people start off their career in all the time. So I'd love to hear how you got to where you are right now and sort of what led you to this career in public service.
Yeah, absolutely. So as I mentioned, I worked at several after school programs in a low income neighborhood in Madison, and I really felt like I was having an impact on these kids' lives on a one-on-one basis, but I really wanted to have a broader impact, which is sort of what led me to public policy. But also the social work aspect. Again, when I started grad school, I was unsure whether public policy was the route or whether I wanted to help, run a large nonprofit. And I really credit University of Chicago because for the social work masters, they had you do, there was a placement at an organization, and I was placed with the city of Evanston in their social services department. And then I also did my own internship planning. I was at Casa Central in a large Latino social service agency in Chicago. And then as part of my public policy degree, I also found a summer internship working at the office of the advisor to the governor of Puerto Rico. So I was writing policy memos in Spanish, like ways Puerto Rico could access higher Medicaid prescription drug savings, memos on like domestic violence. And I loved it. I loved it. And I was like, I want to do this. And then conversely, when I worked for Casa Central, I was reporting to the vice president of programs. And while she was wonderful and the work was really important, it was too far removed from the kids and the clientele. So I was like, okay, well, I don't think I want to do this anymore, which I think is such a huge value of internships and early career exploration. It's as much about finding what you don't want to do as much as it is finding what you do want to do as your career. And certainly my social work background informs my work today. So I ended up graduating with 2 masters and then went the public policy route and started my career at the Minnesota House of Representatives, where I worked for 9 years. And then I fulfilled my dream of working for the governor of the state of Minnesota. I was a policy advisor, and led me to Department of Labor and Industry because I'd spent so much of my career, helping write bills and pass legislation, but I wanted to be on the implementation side of things. So that's why I ended up coming to Department of Labor and Industry. Natalie, you're on mute.
Apologies, I muted myself because there were sirens in the background, classic Chicago life. I was saying that I think it's amazing that you've taken such a route of trying things out. I think that's a way to learn about your career, is to try things. And I often tell alumni that I work with that finding out things you don't like, to me, is just as important as finding things you do like. So I think
Absolutely.
that's a great part of it. Dora, I'd love to hear how you sort of got to where you are now and what your path has been and what kind of made you pursue a career in the public service.
Yeah, of course. So I really credit being a product of mentorship and community. And so my family and I immigrated from Mexico when I was a young kid at like 3 or 4. And I have 2 younger siblings that were born here. My mom had family in California in the Bay Area. And we grew up right around the corner from a community center that was part of the city. And that was a place that had a free homework center, reduced childcare. We grew up taking swim lessons, like, come from that family. And so it became this hub and this really safe place that provided a lot of resources for my family as we were trying to figure out being new to the city and where to go. And even though we had some family. And so for as long as I could remember, I just used to think that the lifeguards were the coolest thing. And all I wanted to do when I grew up was work at the city and be a lifeguard. And that was like all that I dreamed. And I did that at 15. And then I was like, wait, I'm 15. I still have this whole life ahead of me. But through that, I was able to meet just really key mentors that took interest in me. They talked to me about personal statements, about applying to college. I was the first person in my family to go to college, and they really oriented me on this path. And so the thread for me has been being in positions in my work that connect back to the community and help be kind of a voice, an informer, an educator, a connector. And so although all the roles haven't been exactly the same, they have been within that theme of like, I'm helping connect to some resource, or I'm helping inform, or I'm helping, just like bring the community in and have a voice. And so that all over the last 10 years, I think really got me to be where I am now with Obama Foundation, because it's a combination of policy work, research work, community work. And so that's kind of how that started. Specifically, I had one mentor, Laura, who went to Berkeley, also a Latinx woman, took interest in me, helped me apply. And then her husband at the time was working for the former mayor of the city of San Jose, who gave me my first internship. And so I was really lucky to have that. And then that kind of just launchpad my career in the different positions. I worked in the city in different departments. I worked for a workforce nonprofit. And then as a personal kind of goal, I wanted to get a master's. And I forgot to mention that in my intro, but I'm a Harris alum from class of 2020, right in the middle of COVID. That was really rough. But I did it, and I fell in love, my husband and I, with Chicago. And the first job out of Harris was working for Mayor Lightfoot. And I loved it. It was very, very challenging, but I loved it for what it was. And then it just became home. After that, I worked for a workforce nonprofit, and then with the Obama Foundation. And so I just feel like that's been the thread, and I'm really happy where I am now to be able to like combine all of that.
That's amazing. And I think one of the things that you all talked about as part of your career paths is sort of learning skills and things you need to know along the way to build into your next career. And I'd love for you guys maybe to share a little bit about what skills, what practices that you've built up over the year that you feel have been really helpful in public service and have kind of built you to the career that you are today. Dora, I'd love to start with you. So as you've been building up, sort of trying all these different careers and going different paths, what skills have you built along the way? Improv maybe is one of them that you've gone on to sort of use in your career.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds really simple, but to like be kind and have empathy. So in public service, a lot of times you don't, at least in the 10 years, like you don't really do it for the money. I mean, you can have like a comfortable life, but you do it because you have some sort of connection or something drives you. And I think it's really easy. I have a lot of colleagues that started it and get burnt out because sometimes, depending on the role you're in the front line of just getting all the frustration from communities that have been forgotten, or that they've had like false promises or not been followed up. And you're like the next person to reach out, and you inherit, all the elected officials or all the departments or all the organizations that didn't really do anything for them. And so I think being able to find like what drives you is key, because then it makes those days where you're like, why don't I just go to public sector and make a bunch of money and not have to worry, you have different problems. So that has been a key of just like remembering like what drives me and having empathy. That doesn't mean that you don't have standards of like what you're willing to put up with. Obviously, like don't be abused or yelled at or in a work environment, but I think it's important to just like ground yourself in that. And then follow through, right? Don't overpromise because you want to make someone happy, but just to be really honest. Sometimes I think also in public service, you might be the first person to just be really honest about something, a project, and everything in you wants to like overpromise to make them happy, but you have to also ground yourself in reality. Like with the Obama Foundation, I think folks can imagine there's been a lot of frustration around public safety, around just the environment in Jackson Park. And there's this box that we can control. There's another box that we can help partner and steward. And then there's a box that we absolutely have no say over, that we can't even comment on. And so just being really honest about those things, but then bringing it back to like, but in this world, this is what I can bring to you, or this is what I can connect to you. So I think those few things have been key and kind of real in every position that I've had.
Amazing. Kate, I'd love to hear from you as you've built up this career and worked in different parts of the government and in nonprofit worlds. What skills have you learned and brought with you into each career, and what has been the most important ones?
Well, I think being a strong writer always helps. We write a lot of legislative reports as one. But for me, I think in this role, it's about being a strong manager. So, I used to work on the front lines and was the one directly interacting with constituents. But now my staff are the ones, processing construction trade licenses, meeting with apprentices, meeting with employers. So my goal as a manager is really to empower and recognize the expertise of my staff, because I am not an expert in construction codes and licensing. I'm the first to admit that. I came from my family background is the trades, but I have not worked in the trades. So really relying on and recognizing my staff's expertise has been key for our agency to provide good service to our stakeholders.
Yeah, I think learning to use other people's skills is such an important quality, and not having to own all of the projects and own all of the skills, and getting to learn from others. I love we talked kind of about the successes or the skills that you built along the way, but I'd also love to talk about challenges, because I know there have probably been plenty, as there are in every career path, and maybe the public sector is one in particular, because your challenges are not always a facet of how well you are doing your job, but just the environment that you're working in and what you're doing. So, Kay, let's start with you and maybe talk about a time or experiences that you've had where you've had a challenge in your path and how you overcome it and how you worked through it.
Well, I'm going to build off what Dora said. I'm glad you mentioned the importance of being honest with a stakeholder constituent. If you can't, give them the answer that they want, like that's such a hard message to deliver sometimes, but it's needed, and you're being realistic. You don't want to over promise, especially if you can't deliver. So probably the hardest is like the repeat constituents who we aren't able to give them a satisfactory answer. And that's usually when people reach my level, is when they've gotten, the answer from staff, like, sorry, like we reached this conclusion, and no, you might disagree, but this is the sound basis for reaching that decision. And I think it's a balancing act too, because I struggle with, like I said previously, like I trust my staff, they are the experts. And so there are always two sides to the story. That's always the lesson, right? So if we're contacted by a legislator, or there's a constituent issue, or they fault something that the department has done, like I always go to my staff to hear their side of the story. So that's a roundabout answer, like being honest and making sure that, we are doing our best to find a solution, but that might not always be possible.
Yeah, Dora, what about you? Are there times where you faced a challenge? I know you talked a little bit about sort of just the at the Obama Foundation having to face sort of the public perception or public input on a lot of projects. Is that a challenge? Has there been other challenges that you faced along the way, and how you've sort of overcome them?
Yeah, I'm like, I'm laughing inside because I feel like I must love the pain of working for like Mayor Lightfoot and then the Obama Foundation. And then even in California, I worked for like the only Republican on staff, which like California Republican just means you're like financially conservative, but that came with like its own battle. So it's like inner laugh here. I think so along those lines, I was thinking two things. Like one of the best things I learned from my economics professor at Harris was that part of the challenge is that like you may come from a really strong educational background, like the institution that is the University of Chicago, right, in a master's program and in undergrad, but you need to be able to explain it down to like a basic community level, like, you know, someone in high school that's trying to get engaged or informed. And so a challenge has been breaking down a lot of that information and figuring out the audience because, you know, we do write, you know, I'm writing a memo that makes it to the eyes of the Obama family, but then also we're putting together a pamphlet about the resources. And so having that skill is sometimes hard and not everyone possesses both, and that's okay, right? But you know, to Kate's point, you want to be able to be in a team where you're not stacked like one way where you're all researchers, or you're not stacked one way that you're all just public speakers. And it's really nice if you can find a sweet spot to be a good writer at these different levels and stretch that muscle. So that's been challenging to learn. And I'm really glad that I've been able to stretch both those muscles. And I think it's made me competitive and a key player on the teams that I've been on. Hopefully people have felt that. The other part is, I think in public service, normally you are representing something or someone, and a lot of times your own personal values or vision may not align. And so I think I've struggled. I think just every day, right? Like every day, I'm not the Obama family. I'm not Mayor Lightfoot. I'm not this elected official. I'm not this entity. And so what is it about them that I accept and want to continue to like steward and represent them? And what are the things that are non-negotiable for me? And what are things that, you know, maybe that's not how I would have handled X, Y, and Z, but they did it this way, and this is my piece in that solution. And I think some days are harder than others with the mayor's office during COVID. There's a lot of hard days, and we didn't get to work remote, and we were in every day. And we also dealt with, I mean, her administration dealt with a lot of social unrest and just you know, everything that happened within those like 3 years was bananas to have with an
Absolutely.
elected official and anyone that was working for an elected official, but around the country. So I think that's been really challenging, but I think you kind of find a way to like shovel yourself out, and then you're able to take it kind of to your next opportunity.
I'm
Yeah,
glad that you brought that up, Dora, in terms of when you work for someone and you might not always agree 100% with their views. My first job at the Minnesota House of Representatives, I was a legislative assistant. And I worked for a rep who was from southern Minnesota in a conservative district, and she was pro-life and I am pro-choice. And so I sort of had to just set that aside and like responding to constituents or like the vote she would take, like just respect that was her view and her making sure that I represented that view, even though it was at odds with my own. And that is definitely a challenge and was a challenge.
Yeah, I've talked about it too with, you know, a lot of my friends, like that very first job working for that a Republican council member. And I think again, it's like a decision that you all make in your career of like at what level do you want to influence? And it is totally amazing and okay to be that like on the ground grassroots organizer. It's also okay to be within the system and be like that one outlier in this office that may not align with your views and like chip away, even though if the change is small. But if you're not there, you're not going to change the status quo if everyone is thinking the same. And so it's like it takes those people to volunteer to be like that one person that's going to find a way to push within that, and then all the organizations around that. And so like what role at what level do you want to play to chip away and kind of push your message or push, you know, your agenda, your thoughts, or however you want to be effective in the work that you do.
Yeah, that's awesome. I think it's such a great example of, I'm glad you guys spoke about that. The sort of role you play when you're in public service is that you're not just representing yourself in your career, but everyone, and you're talking to a very wide audience. So it's not just, I think it's easy, especially for those of us in the Chicago world where we talk about really big problems and really big conversations, having to share that with a wider audience who just wants the information from you. They don't always want to have the sort of the whole conversation about it. They would just like for you to share your information and your work in a way that's digestible and understandable. So I think that's really great. Well, we've talked about challenges. But I also like for us to talk about successes. So I'd love for you to share stories of times in your career where you've had like a really great project, a really great success, and something that's kind of inspired you to keep going in this career in public service. That maybe at times there can be dips. What's been kind of the mountain for you and a really great opportunity? Dora, I'd love to start with you and tell us about something that's been a great opportunity and a great success for you and something you've done.
Oh, that's a tough question. I mean, there's been a lot of mini ones throughout the way that are like anecdotal, where you are that one person. I think like earlier on where I was like literally the person like picking up the phone, at an office, where you don't realize the impact that you have of like connecting someone or informing them and how that's going to ripple in their life. And I think, it's easy to be like, oh my God, oh my gosh, I'm answering phones all day and I like got chewed out by this person or I'm bombarded by this email. Like what difference am I making, especially like early on in your career? And then kind of throughout that, you happen to like bump into these people in the community or at a meeting, and then they bring it back of like your office or your role connected me to this position. And I've had a lot of those, especially connecting folks when DACA and DAPA executive order, which was the early childhood arrival under the Obama administration, was happening. There's a lot of city resources. That was my one of my first roles, connecting folks, and you're like, I was there. I spoke Spanish, I connected them in this. And so you're like, I did that. That was me. I picked up the phone and I was a part of like this small journey. And so that's been really cool. I think the other one is I'm really proud of myself of making it out of the Mayor Lightfoot administration. No shade to the mayor, but just going back to, I could have not imagined being in the role where so many different fires happened every single day consistently for over a year. And I think at this point I did that and like nothing phases me. I think I've reached that where it was like, what do you want to talk about? Everything at work now is so minuscule in the sense of like, there is a solution. Trust me when I tell you we're not dealing with like civil unrest and the bridges being raised in Chicago. Trust me when I tell you that COVID and spikes and everything else. And so that has been a win. I've just like, I reflect on that and it's like kind of this badge of honor of like, you challenge yourself, you didn't give up. A lot of people quit pretty early on. And so just sticking through that and seeing it through has been like a really big win for me.
Amazing. Okay, I'd love to hear, has there been particular successes in your career that you're really proud of, something that's kind of you feel really proud that you've gotten to work on or gotten to be a part of?
Yeah, this one's easy for me. So in 2013 and 2014, I worked as the legislative director to the Speaker of the Minnesota House. And that was a unique time in Minnesota politics because all Democrats were in control of the House and the Senate and the governor's office. And so that provided an easier political path for a lot of like more DFL Democratic policies. So it also is like the value of having a good boss who encourages you. So in summer of 2013, I said to my boss, I was like, so I was doing some reading and there's this bill in New York called the Women's Equality Act. And I kind of would like to explore something similar for Minnesota. And my boss said, absolutely. Like, why don't you convene some stakeholders and see, are there ideas that could, improve the lives of women in Minnesota? So as part of that work, I helped develop a package of bills, which became the Women's Economic Security Act, which was a package of 14 laws designed to support working women primarily and promote economic security for women in Minnesota. So we're actually coming up on the 10-year anniversary in May this year, and I'm hoping to plan a little celebratory event. So it was a very like political exercise too. So we did not have a pro-choice majority in either the House or the Senate. And reading about the New York Equality Act, they had included some choice legislation in their package, and it ended up scuttling the whole thing. So, well, arguably, like right to choose is part of a woman's economic security. We purposefully did not include any legislation related to abortion in the package, and that was a strategic decision. We also included some aspirational items that we knew would face a tough political road, like earned sick and safe time. And so there were certain elements that did drop from the original package, but I think 11 of the 14 actually passed and became law. And the reason I bring it up and the reason I'm so proud of it is it actually really informed my career path. Two of the provisions were related to the rights of nursing mothers in the workplace to express milk on a break. And then I borrowed from other states and we put a law into place where an employee has the right to request and receive a pregnancy accommodation. So obviously having a job is key to a woman's economic security. So making sure that she can work safely during her pregnancy, like really simple accommodations, like more frequent restroom, food and water breaks, right to seating, things like that. So passing that bill actually brought me to the Department of Labor and Industry because I also oversee our labor standards division. So we are responsible for enforcing the Nursing Mothers and Pregnancy Accommodations provisions of the Women's Economic Security Act. And if I fall in acronyms, we call it WESA. And so the department produces an annual report. And so of course I, read that report with interest every year, and the department wasn't receiving many complaints. And so one of like my biggest failings of the Women's Economic Security Act is we didn't give the department any money to do outreach. So lesson learned, like what good is a law if nobody knows about it, right? So we were finding that women didn't know about their rights and, employers didn't know about their responsibilities under the law. So coming to the department, we secured funding for outreach and strengthened the existing nursing mothers law. So now, same as Illinois and Georgia, employers can't reduce an employee's compensation. So they can't require an employee to make up time or cut her pay for breaks taken to express milk at work. So I'd say WESA is my proudest professional achievement, and in part because it's work that's ongoing. And so we are seeing a direct impact. We hear from women and we're able to say, yes, we'll help contact your employer and let them know that they need to provide a private and secure space for you to express milk. So that's been definitely my greatest professional achievement, and something that's a passion project for me too, is supporting women in the workplace.
That's amazing. Congratulations. What a great story of success and hard work towards a goal. I think that's amazing. And you talked a little bit in there about convening a group of stakeholders together. And we have a really big interest here at UChicago in talking about sort of the overlap in industries. So we know not everyone who works or is interested in working in the public sector is going to be maybe in a working for a government official or working in an office for some government. They may be working related to the field. They may be, someone who contracts with the government or works with the government. So I'd love for you guys to talk about your experience and sort of working with stakeholders and building coalitions, whether it's from private sector, whether it's from nonprofits, different parts of your public sector life, different parts of the community. How have you sort of brought together a coalition, worked with a lot of people, and used their sort of resources and experience and talent to build something that's really great? Dora, I'd love to start with you. How do you engage stakeholders, and how do you build work that kind of aligns with a lot of different areas?
Yeah, I mean, that's essentially like 80% of my job now, leading to the opening of the Presidential Center. And so the team that I'm on, we've essentially divided the city into 3 quadrants, or 3, I guess, a third of the city. And so I take downtown in the north side, and essentially any stakeholder that falls into that. And so that is your community leaders, that's your nonprofits, business-oriented organizations / chambers, donors, and then the youth is kind of how we look at it. And there are different types of folks that we organize for different reasons. So one example is we're in the middle of finishing up our design inside of the center. And so we have an inclusive design working group that I'm in charge of organizing. And so that means that we need to represent folks that need certain accommodations, folks that are experts. To Kate's earlier point, I'm not an expert in inclusive design by any means. I have a working knowledge where I can help organize and facilitate, but I'm also not someone that needs X, Y, and Z accommodation to kind of experience a space. And so you have to, be able to kind of combine all that. And so it's been really cool to reach out and facilitate that. And so that's one example. Another example is working with the business community of how something like the Presidential Center is going to impact the way that they do business in Chicago, the way that they operate tourism. And so convening those folks as well has been, really fun, but you also have to, again, like be realistic of like, what are we doing here? Are we just here to get suggestions? Are we here to problem solve? So being really, you have to be like really prepared with your agenda and what the goals are at the beginning, but those have been really, really fun. And then the third bucket has just been full on educating. Like folks don't know about the center and what's going to be in the center. And they don't know that it's this hub that's going to have an endless amount of kind of free resources and programming for folks in the city. And so it's not just an archive for the presidential documents. It's a free library through the Chicago Public Library, and then it'll have all this youth programming, a recording studio, community garden, all these things. And so, you have to talk to like the farmers market and open school nights and, wherever you can gather to send that message. And that's why too, it's important to be able to be nimble with the messaging depending on your audience. So my job now has been an array of like every single stakeholder you can imagine. And I'm walking into like a chamber roundtable, and then I'm going to like a farmer's market and helping facilitate those conversations. Or I have a team that I work with to help me do that. So it's been fun, challenging, interesting, but fun.
That's amazing. That sounds like a really interesting way to get to know different parts of the city and get to know different stakeholders. You get to learn a lot from a lot of people. That sounds awesome. Kate, I know you talked a little bit about ways you've engaged stakeholders, but is there anything that you can share and how you've sort of learned from others or brought others into the conversation when you're making decisions? I'm sure you're now foray into the sports world that was unexpected, involved a little bit of that. So I'd love to hear too on how you've engaged different stakeholders along the way.
We're really fortunate at Department of Labor and Industry as we have several boards and councils, which they are the technical experts that we rely upon to help us make decisions and help us like bring forward legislative initiatives, for example. So we have a board called the Construction Codes Advisory Council, which includes technical experts from all areas of the construction industry. So we really rely on that council to come up with recommendations and to study an issue. So for example, there was a proposal by, a legislator where they were going to require window cleaning anchors on a building where you couldn't actually use the window anchors. They were actually inaccessible. So we were hearing, and they put that in law. So in Minnesota law, we had to require these window cleaning anchors on a building, but it was like on a building with a pitched roof. And there wasn't access to it. So when the legislature said, oh, we should change that, we said, hey, let's bring it to the Construction Codes Advisory Council, and they can help us develop what are those safe window cleaning methods. So, and they did, like they came up with, based on some national model codes and looking at other building codes and what are, studying what are, multiple ways of safely cleaning windows. So we really rely on our boards and councils. And I know you brought up Office of Combative Sports. We also have a Combative Sports Advisory Council, which is made up of, we've got former judge on there. We have a physician. And so they helped inform some of our policy development there. And so we frequently bring issues to the Combative Sports Advisory Council as well.
That's awesome. That's like you said, Medora, it's so interesting to hear how you can engage experts. I think it's a really interesting way to show how people of all different expertise and careers can kind of contribute to the world of public sector and how there's often interaction. I have kind of two questions that I'm gonna combine for you here, which is, I think when some people think about the public sector, they think of the sort of slow bureaucratic shuffle that can sometimes exist, that things take a long time. There's a lot of rules and red tape. Kate, your example was a great one. They created a law that actually didn't necessarily apply to every building, and they had to work around that. And also sometimes when you think about careers in the public sector, people can think of them. I had a professor, I have a degree in international relations and a master's in public policy. So I remember a professor telling me one time that sometimes people can look at the public sector as being male, pale, and stale, meaning it's kind of an older guy's place. And I'm wondering, in both those respects, can you talk about your experience in working in a career as two women in these industries and how that's been for you, but also in kind of working in a place that can be a bit bureaucratic and traditional, and how you work to maybe, whether it's innovation itself or just work around those currently existing models to bring some modernization and some newness to what's seen as kind of an older industry. Dora, I'd love to start with you.
Yeah, I'm gonna bring that, Natalie, back to male, pale, and stale. Because I think part of that is true, but I think also a lot of the public sector is like male, pale, and stale, and like their board and their committee too. So I think you kind of get it, depending on the industry. It's so funny. Let's see. I mean, for sure, like being a woman and being a person of color and an immigrant, like, yeah, I've been the first person in the room to look like me or just be a woman, and you're facing, you bring a different lens that's like really valuable, but you also are highly qualified and like you have a right to be there. And so I think sometimes you have that like self-awareness of like, I'm the other here, and what does that mean, and how are folks looking at me? But I found it really rewarding in public service that I've been in pretty diverse groups where I feel comfortable kind of sharing a different opinion. And even in the groups that you don't, just establishing, kind of like a standard of like respect and like making your boundaries. And it's been like, okay, navigating that. I don't have like a specific example where it's been like incredibly challenging. I think I've been really lucky around that. But I think in public service, one of the coolest parts is if you are on a team where you feel like you're kind of that outlier voice, going back to the folks that you work, you do get access because you're working for the public sector. You have all these partnerships, right? You're not going to be in public service and not work with other organizations. And so you're able to connect with those folks and like bring in those voices or find your people to kind of make this coalition of whatever you want to push forward or whatever you want to work on. So that, that has been my experience for sure. It moves slow depending on what you're working on. But you have to kind of find those small wins of like, I made it through this, and like, here's now the next step. And then here's now the next step. But let me kick it to Kate and think about it a little more.
So our agency is very male dominated, or it was for a time, and then it switched. And I am now part of an entire leadership team of women, which is unique and great. And also, I don't know, I wish we had a little male energy on our team, from, bringing different perspectives and, I don't know. But then at the same time, you sort of come back to the question, like, no one ever said when it was just men in the room, like, we should bring a woman in. So I think for our agency, we've been really intentional, and a focus of ours is representation and making sure that, like on our boards and councils and among our staff, that we're really recruiting and retaining women and people of color, and language capability is so important. So making sure that we have people answering the phone who speak the main languages in Minnesota, Spanish, Somali, Hmong, and making sure we're translating materials. So I would say that's really a primary focus, is making sure that we've got people who are, interacting with the public and who reflect Minnesotans.
That's awesome. Thank you for sharing all of that. I think we have a couple minutes left before we want to get to our audience questions. So if you've been sitting in the audience, please feel free to keep writing those into the Q&A. To wrap this up in a U Chicago way, I'm wondering if you guys could share your experience at the university and how it shaped you into your careers that you have now, and how your kind of experience as a Maroon has led you to where you are currently. Kate, I'd love to start with you. I know you talked a little bit about the internship experiences you had, but how has your time at U Chicago carried on with you through your career?
So definitely the internships were highly influential on my career and my career path, and also just some of my professors and classmates. So I had Charles Whelan at Harris School of Public Policy, and it was communicating and analyzing public policy. I don't know if anyone else had him. He was so good. But he did this exercise where he had us present and he taped us. So we could like see how we present. And I realized when he did that, I was like, oh my God, I had no idea that I talked with my hands so much. So I think about that because I often have to testify at legislative committees. So I'm very cognizant of like how I present. I was like, oh, what a great exercise that Professor Whelan had us do. And another class I had was with Professor Charles Kerwin, and it was about race and public policy. And he presented a really cool paper and research on um, individuals who applied for a job named, one was named Keisha and one was named like LeBron or something. So you could like racially identify a person based on their name, and just that research into how when they were offered a job, and you're surprised you could have the exact same applicant, but if the woman was named Keisha versus Sarah, just patterns of, how people hiring patterns and how bias can play into hiring. And I still think about that class. So it's sort of like those discrete moments that influence my work, but definitely the internships and the mentorship.
Awesome. Dora, can you talk a little bit about your experience at UChicago and how it's turned in? I know you stayed in Chicago, so obviously it's given you some love for the city, but how has it impacted your career thus far?
Yeah, first I got to be like, shout out to Charles Kerwin because he was the best professor at at Harris, and I'm
Right?
still
Loved
mad
him.
at Chicago for not retaining him, and now he's leading this master's program elsewhere. My one gripe, but he was, he was the professor that said, if I can't explain microeconomics that I'm teaching you to my grandmother, then I don't know how to teach. And so you need to be able to break down those, like why should they care about the price of X or whatever. So that stays with me. And he had a beautiful lecture at the end that I think half of us cried because he was so inspirational. But I think a lot of many things, like to Kate's point, I think you have an incredible opportunity to form real professional friendships with your professors. And I think in graduate school, when you're a little older, even like personal friendships, that these are the folks that you can call upon as you do your career change or as you feel stuck or you're like, I'm kind of done with the sector. That's where I was leaving Mayor Lightfoot's administration of like, I worked in the city for so long. I want to do this work, but I don't necessarily want to be a consultant like half of my classmates of Harris did. Um, like no shade to consultants, but like it wasn't, I don't know that that's what I wanted to do. And so one shout out is to Professor John Burroughs, who I think is a professor at the Booth School that does a negotiation class at Harris. He's someone that has guided me through every new role that I've had and kind of thinking through like, is this the right path? I also feel like I've benefited from the mentorship program that Harris has, where they paired me up with a woman named Marie Lynch, who's now the CHRO at Morningstar. At the time was at the nonprofit that I worked at, that helped me make that pivot and connect me. And then 3 is just the alumni network. I think I found them incredibly generous as I was also freaking the F out in the middle of COVID and being like, what am I going to do? Where am I going to work? And, all these folks that kind of shared the alumni on their LinkedIn, I would message them and I would say more than half would respond back and just say, yeah, I'll do an informational coffee. Like, this is my career path. This is my advice, or let me connect you to this person in this market. Because at the time I didn't know if we wanted to stay in Chicago. I think I would have been happy to go to any kind of major city. My husband's a teacher and, he's a math teacher and kind of get a job anywhere, luckily. So it was really like, where do I want to, kind of pursue that. So I think just taking advantage of all those things have been important. I think you take it for granted and maybe, in high school, you're like, the professor thing is different, but you're in college now, you're in grad school. These are your colleagues, form those friendships, have them mentor you, have coffee with them. Like I still have coffee with a lot of the professors. and it's just been the way that I've been able to kind of be successful in Chicago.
That's amazing. And I promise everyone, I did not ask Dora to plug the benefits of an alumni network. That was not anything I told her about beforehand, but we promise you it is a great benefit of being connected to alumni. So I'm glad to hear a real life example of how it's worked for you. Well, we have a couple of questions in the chat I'd love to get to in our last few minutes here. I think one of the first ones is, and obviously you both kind of have a very intensive, extensive public sector knowledge and experience, but for those of our alumni in the audience who are maybe coming from a private sector background and wanting to make a jump into the public sector, do you have any advice on to like how to transfer those skills and that experience into a more public facing role?
Did I freeze? No. Sorry, Natalie, so the question was like pivoting from private sector into the public sector?
Yes, yeah. If you have any advice on how to kind of make that jump.
Yeah, I mean, I think that whoever's coming from that, like your superpower is that you're used to like having an abundance of resources, maybe, right? Things move very quickly, and you have this like really unique point of view where you can find inefficiencies, like potentially, like maybe that's the thing. And I think if someone's like a lifetime city employee at X department and you're used to like the status quo and it's easy to fall into that, that's your like superpower of like bringing in that lens of like, hey, I see this like this hole here and here's like a solution. And being realistic with like resources and timeline, but I think you just have a unique perspective of a different sector. And I think it can be as easy as that, where you sell yourself on, in this role, I am a problem solver in this way, or I'm resourceful in this way, or because I bring this point of view, I'm X in this way, and then find that like lane where you're that person on the team that brings that thing. Or I'm a really good writer. I can research really, really quickly. And then you bring that into, someone. A lot of times it's like I use this tool that no one else knows how to use online because we have it and it can help solve this other problem or this thing. I think a lot of folks that I've worked with bring that, and you're like, wow, we're so thankful that you know how to use this platform that we didn't even know existed that can help us solve this problem because you used it in the private sector.
Awesome.
Yeah, definitely identifying those skill sets that can be of use and adapted to the public sector, and just networking. Dora, I'm so glad you brought up like your mentorship and your LinkedIn alumni networking. Like just, talk to people and identify opportunities and keep an eye out for job openings that might be a good fit. If anyone wants to come to Minnesota, we have a lot of jobs in state government that are open right now, even at our agency.
Awesome. I love to hear that. And you both are coming from a background of having master's degrees and sort of advanced degrees. Do you feel as though earning that master's degree has been a great benefit to your career? I think sometimes people ask themselves, like, I'm thinking about entering the public sector, I'm thinking about making a career change. Do I need to get that degree first, or should I get my feet wet, get to know, and then maybe go on and earn the degree, or maybe I end up not needing it all? What are your thoughts on sort of should they get that master's degree or not? Kate, I'd love to start with you.
I would say yes, get that master's degree, but I also found great value in working and having, my first professional experience before I went to grad school. So again, just like getting to know yourself better and your interests and experiences. So I would say that was a huge benefit, was working first before I went back to grad school.
Yeah, I would say like double, triple ditto to Kate. I would say half of the folks I went to Harris with were coming right out of undergrad, and they were brilliant and amazing and good colleagues or good classmates to have. But I think that there's something that grounds you in the reality of like workforce that you have. Like if you are able to like cut your teeth in like at least 2 years, you understand, you have like a better understanding of how that works and then can bring that perspective. Because I think I was very like idealistic in undergrad and was like, I want to change the world in these ways and the world should work this way. And then you just kind of get hit in the face with like, actually, there's all this red tape or all these decision makers or funding constraints or whatever. And so I think if you're able to do that, that's like a really great way to then like transition into your master's. But then in the master's program, for sure, I was able to like have better writing skills, have better research skills, learn how to manipulate data with Harris. That's a big deal, right? And then just build relationships as a graduate student and what you're bringing in. So definitely worth it, and appreciate being able to work before and then bringing that experience in.
That's amazing. And you both discussed a little bit about sort of the research and the work that goes into having some of these roles, that it's a lot about kind of figuring out what's going on in the world and staying up to date on current trends or current topics with your, whether it's with your constituents or just like Kaylee, you talked about seeing what's going on in New York and saying, could we do something like that here? What is your advice on kind of keeping up to date with current trends for those that are looking to maybe learn a little bit more about what's going on in the public sector, or people that are in the field wanting to sort of grow their knowledge in various topics or various parts of the public industry? Kate, I'd love to start with you.
I mean, obviously just being well read and keeping up with the news. I do tend to learn a lot from other states. And if I'm, pursuing a policy change, I frequently look to legislation in other states. It's nice to be first, but it's also really helpful to learn from other states. So this past year, Minnesota passed Earn Sick and Safe Time, which was already law, and ordinances had passed in 4 major cities in Minnesota. So we were able to learn from other cities and also learn from other states. And we also just passed into law a paid family and medical leave program. And again, we weren't the first state to do so. And we are learning so much from other states that went first. It's like, what are their pitfalls and what technology systems did they use? So we rely a lot on our neighboring states. Even if we're a little jealous that they were ahead of us, it's to our benefit that they went first.
Yeah, I mean, to Katie's point, like I am on an endless amount of newsletters, which sometimes I just scan, but a lot of times like community news is really important. And so being able to be, I think, plugged in at different levels is also important. Like have somewhere where you have kind of your like national headlines, maybe locally in the market, and then find a few organizations that you're interested in their work. Maybe it's their topic, maybe it's the nonprofit, and follow their newsletters and what they're doing in the community. I think helps inform, kind of the workshops we put on or the meetings that we want to have. If something is like a trending topic of, like for Chicago right now, the migrant population is obviously something in the forefront of Chicago that we have to pivot and figure out how that fits into the work that we're doing in Chicago. And then also, we just hosted a whole workshop on challenging yourself on the news, the type of news that you consume, because it's really easy to have a catered for you page, like on TikTok, on Instagram, where depending on your likes, right? And we're in this AI world, the algorithm is feeding you things that are based off your likes, who you follow, who your friends are. And it can get pretty skewed pretty quickly without you realizing. So kind of having that as a reminder to challenge yourself of reading something maybe you wouldn't normally read, or follow something that you normally wouldn't follow, because then otherwise it's just a bunch of like yes and kind of news that you're like, oh yeah, I agree with that, or that makes sense, or cool, glad I got an update on that.
Well, we're coming to the end of our hour, so as we wrap up, I just wanted to say a big thank you to Kate and Dora for sharing their time and their expertise and their experiences with us. It has been great to hear about your time and your experiences and all that you've worked in, and hopefully inspiring to our audience. I've been really inspired by everyone who's been having a conversation in the chat about their different career paths and how they got to it. This is exactly what we want to do. So thank you so much for joining us. I'm going to pop in the chat a link to the rest of our networking in the New Year events. We have some great conversations happening about climate change, about financial services, consulting dinner happening in Chicago in the end of this week. If you'd love to join us, we'd love to see you there. And also to say, as we wrap up, that there is going to be a survey that pops up at the end of this. We'd love to hear your thoughts and just help us plan for the rest of our year. We have some great ideas and we'd love to have some more. But Kate and Dora, thank you so much for sharing your time and everything with us today. And I hope everyone has a great day.
Thank you so much. Good luck, y'all.
Thanks everyone.